The alien child had no legs, but the human built her wings. Mark walked slowly through the burned ruins of Outpost K-17. The sky above was filled with red smoke, and the ground under his boots crunched with broken glass and metal. He wasn't looking for trouble, just old tech to trade for food and batteries. The war had ended 3 years ago. But the silence still felt like it screamed. His scanner beeped, then stopped. There was movement beneath the wreckage, very weak, very slow. Mark froze, hand on his old blaster. Could be a wild scavenger. Could be a trap. He waited, holding his breath. Then he heard Ida's soft cry, like a child, without thinking. He rushed toward the sound. Dropping to his knees, he pulled away a twisted beam. Then an old thermal blanket, and there curled into a ball under a broken escape pod was a small alien girl. Her skin was light blue, glowing faintly, and her eyes too big for her head blinked up at him with terror and pain. She didn't move, not even to back away. Mark's heart dropped. Her legs were gone, below her waist. Only blood-stained wrappings and melted flesh remained. He looked around, searching for signs of a fight, but saw nothing, only her and a tiny crumpled note clutched in her hand. Mark slowly took the note, opening it with shaking fingers. The message was written in shaky galactic standard. "Please, don't leave her alone." That was all. No name, no warning, just that single line. Mark looked back at the girl, and for a second, he didn't see an alien. He saw someone left behind, just like him. He slid his backpack off and opened his medkit. The girl flinched when he touched her, but she didn't scream. She just stared at him, her eyes full of fear and hope. He worked fast, cleaning her wounds and injecting a pain blocker. "I'm not gonna hurt you, okay?" he whispered. "You're safe now." The girl didn't answer, but her eyes blinked slowly, as if she understood. Suddenly, a shadow passed overhead. Mark ducked and pulled the girl into his arms, sliding back under the pod through the cracks. He saw a dark drone sweeping over the ruins, its red scanner flashing over bodies and broken machines. Scavenger drones, or worse. Hunters. Mark's blood turned cold. Whoever left this girl behind didn't want her found. The drone paused, hovered, then flew off. He waited until the sound disappeared, then slowly crawled out again. Still holding her close, he looked down her. Eyes were closed, but she was still breathing. Mark stood, legs shaking, and started walking. Not toward his camp, but the opposite direction, toward the deep tunnels, the forgotten shelters. The places no one scanned anymore. This girl didn't belong to him, but now she was his responsibility. He didn't even know her name, but he wasn't going to leave her. 2 hours later, Mark reached an old ventilation shaft and climbed down carefully. Inside was a dusty shelter with a cracked roof and half-dead lights. He laid her down on a soft spot and started a small heater. As the warmth filled the room, the girl opened her eyes again. Mark smiled softly. "I'll call you Lena," he said. "That sound you made earlier sounded like that." The girl blinked again, slowly, then looked around the shelter. She still didn't speak. But she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him. Mark sat against the wall, exhausted, staring at her. How could someone do this to a child? Cut off her legs, leave her with a note, and disappear. Outside, something howled in the wind. Lena jumped and reached for him blindly. Mark gently took her hand and squeezed it. "You're safe here," he whispered. "I'll take care of you." But inside, he felt the weight of danger settling over them. She wasn't just a child. Something about her felt different, and he knew deep in his bones others would come looking for her. He didn't care. They'd have to go through him first. As Lena drifted into sleep, her small hand still holding his, Mark stared at the broken ceiling. He didn't have a plan, but he knew one thing: he wasn't going to let her die here. Not like this. Not in silence, not alone. The shelter was quiet, except for the soft hum of the heater. Mark hadn't slept all night. He sat on the floor with his tools spread out. Wiping dust from old metal parts across the room, Lena lay curled in a blanket, her breathing calm. But her small face still pale and weak. He didn't know why he was doing this. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even a soldier. Just a man who had lost everything and now lived by trading scrap. But when he looked at her broken, abandoned, silent something inside him refused to walk away. She needed more than a warm place and bandages. She needed to move, to live, but without legs. Even crawling was painful for her. Mark looked at the spare wheels in his bag, then at a broken hover panel he had found years ago. He stood up, grabbed his tools, and began working. The next day, when Lena opened her eyes, Mark rolled something across the floor toward her, a flat board with soft cushions, 2 small wheels underneath, and padded straps for her waist. She stared at it, confused. Mark smiled. "It's not pretty, but it'll help." He gently lifted her and strapped her in, careful not to hurt her. Then he rolled her forward. Slowly, her eyes widened, and for the first time, she smiled. Mark chuckled. "There you go, little speedster." She touched the wheels carefully, testing how they turned. Then she looked up at him and nodded. No words, but the meaning was clear. "Thank you." They spent the next few days in silence. Mark would go out during the day, looking for food, and parts. Lena stayed hidden in the shelter, learning to move with the wheels. Each evening when he returned, she would wait at the door, her big eyes watching for him. One night, Mark brought back something strange, a small radio transmitter, half broken. He fixed it and turned it on, hoping to catch some chatter from traders or nearby scavengers. Instead, he heard a voice. "To all units, repeat, prototype still missing. Codename V-17. Reward offered for recovery. Do not damage." Mark's hands froze. He turned the volume down and looked at Lena. She sat near the wall, playing with wires and scrap pieces, but her hands glowed softly again, just like before. He remembered the note. Don't leave her alone. And now this prototype V-17. Missing, valuable, wanted. Lena wasn't just some poor refugee. She was part of something bigger, something dangerous. Mark sat back, heart pounding. He looked at the child in front of him, moving bits of metal like puzzle pieces, forming strange shapes he didn't recognize. She didn't seem dangerous. She seemed brilliant. She had taught herself how to balance her weight on the board. She could fix things faster than Mark sometimes, even without tools. Whatever she was, she wasn't just made to be a child. She was designed for something else. But Mark didn't care. She trusted him now. And he had made a promise she wouldn't be alone again. Later that evening, as Mark tried to organize his gear, Lena crawled over with something in her hands. It was an old datapad, cracked and dusty. She tapped it, and an image blinked to life, a design. 2 long metallic wings, curved like a bird's, with tiny thrusters under each feather. Mark leaned in, shocked. That's my old project," he whispered. He had designed that years ago, before the war. Dreaming of a human glider suit, he never finished it, never got it to fly. But here it was, on the screen. And Lena had found it. She tapped it again, then pointed to her back. Mark stared at her in disbelief. You want wings?" Lena nodded slowly, eyes serious. He laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it felt impossible. And yet, somehow, not impossible for her. She didn't want legs back. She wanted to fly. Mark looked at her, at the broken world around them, at the tiny spark of hope in her eyes, and in that moment, he decided he would build them, even if it took everything he had left. Because she believed she could fly, and he believed in her, even if the whole galaxy was coming to take her back. She would fly first, and they would have to catch her in the sky. Mark didn't sleep that night. He sat beside the old workbench, a soft light glowing from the lamp above as the cold wind moaned through the cracks in the shelter walls. Beside him lay scattered parts metal feathers, broken servos, and heat-twisted wires from old drones across the room. Lena slept peacefully on her wheeled board, her small hands still glowing faintly, even in her dreams. He kept staring at the drawing she had shown him, his old wing design. But it wasn't just a copy. She had improved it. She added stabilizer fins and tiny engine coils, things he never thought of back then. Mark whispered to himself, "She's not just smart. She's something else." The next morning, Mark placed a piece of curved metal in front of her. Lena blinked, then smiled. They didn't speak, but they didn't need to. Every day after that, the shelter filled with sound, clanking, clicking. Sparks flying, wires being twisted, and wings slowly taking shape. Lena didn't just watch. She worked with him, her fingers moving faster than human hands. Bending and shaping pieces with a strange energy inside her skin. She couldn't speak, but sometimes she hummed a soft, strange melody while she worked. Mark never asked what it meant. He just listened. One afternoon, while scavenging through an old wreck, Mark found a hidden panel beneath a floor grate. Inside, there was a crate sealed and locked tight. He cracked it open and found what he didn't expect: military-grade power cells, enough to power a hovercraft, or, if carefully tuned, 2 mechanical wings. He stared at them, half smiling, half worried. These weren't leftovers. Someone had stashed them recently. That meant others were nearby. He rushed back to the shelter. But before he could even say a word, Lena rolled over to him and handed him a tiny metal ball, a surveillance sensory scently active. She had found it behind the heater. Mark's face turned pale. They were being watched. He didn't panic, but something inside him twisted like a knot. Lena was watching him now, her eyes searching his face for meaning. He knelt beside her, placed his hand on her shoulder, and whispered, "We have to hurry." The wings weren't finished. They still needed balance tuning, energy calibration, and testing, but they were close enough to hope. And Mark realized he wasn't just building wings for her anymore. He was building an escape. That night, while Lena slept, he stared at her for a long time. She had become more than a mission, more than a mystery. She was a reason, something that pulled him forward. In her silent strength, he saw something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. But the longer they stayed here, the more danger they brought closer. Whoever wanted her, they weren't going to stop. Mark knew he couldn't fight them all, but maybe, just maybe, she could fly away before they came. As the wind outside picked up, blowing ash and sand against the walls, he sat at the workbench. Again, he placed the final feather on the left wing and welded it carefully. A soft blue light shimmered across the surface as the energy cells kicked in. It worked. Across the room, Lena stirred in her sleep, as if sensing something had changed. Mark leaned back, exhausted, and looked at the finished wings, resting quietly like a sleeping bird. The design was hers, the hands were his, but the dream belonged to both of them. He closed his eyes for a moment, but even in rest, he felt that something was coming. They were running out of time, and soon the sky would be their only chance. Mark stared at the wings resting on the table. They were beautiful in their own way: silver arcs, feather-shaped panels, small energy coils gently humming. He had never finished anything in his life. Not a home, not a relationship, not even a war he was forced to fight. But this felt real. He heard movement behind him and turned. Lena was awake, her big, glowing eyes locked on the wings. She moved closer, wheeling herself slowly, her breath short with excitement. Mark nodded, almost ready. Lena reached into her blanket and pulled something out, a tiny crystal chip wrapped in cloth. She offered it to him with both hands, carefully, as if it were precious. Mark took it and examined it. It was an old data drive, shaped like no tech he had ever seen. When he inserted it into the wing's interface port, the lights on both wings flickered, then stabilized. A diagram flashed in the air above the table schematics. Energy maps, stabilizer curves, advanced, elegant, alien. The wings were syncing with her. Not just machines, they were meant for her body. Mark looked at Lena, surprised. You already knew they'd work. She nodded slowly, her fingers tracing lines in the air that matched the hologram. It wasn't just knowledge, it was memory. This wasn't the first time she had seen this tech. Mark took a slow breath. Lena, what are you? The girl's face changed. She pointed at the wall, then started to draw on the dusty surface using her glowing finger. A large circle like a planet, lines of cages inside. Small figures, one with glowing hands, then one cage. Opened and the small figure escaped. She turned to Mark. Her face filled with something he didn't expect. Guilt. He swallowed hard. You were made in a lab. Lena looked away, silent. Mark understood now. She wasn't just a child. Not in the way humans understood. She was built, not born. But whoever made her had underestimated one thing: her will. Her soul, her hunger to live, outside, the wind. Picked up suddenly, carrying a strange hum. Mark turned off the lamp and moved to the doorway. Peeking through the cracks in the wall, a dark shape hovered in the night sky, sleek. Silent, scanning with soft blue lights, another drone. But this one wasn't searching, it was tracking. Mark's stomach tightened. The sensor Lena had found earlier wasn't the only one. He returned to the workshop, voice low but firm. We don't have more time. Lena nodded, rolled closer to the table, and placed her hands on the wings. The feathers glowed under her touch, responding instantly. Mark quickly adjusted the straps and carefully helped lift the light frame over her shoulders. It clicked into place like it had always belonged there. He stepped back, watching her. Unsure, she looked too small, too fragile. But when she stretched the wings out wide, her face changed. Not a victim, not a lost child. A fighter, she practiced. Moving the wings, testing balance and tilt. Mark gave her small commands. She followed perfectly. But the energy levels were unstable. Too much surge could burn the core. Suddenly, the drone outside buzzed louder, closer. Mark's voice sharpened. Hide, now. But Lena didn't move to the shadows. Instead, she tapped her chest once. Then looked at the hatch in the ceiling. Mark shook his head. You're not ready. But she just smiled faintly, her eyes calm. Then she wrote a word on the floor. With her finger trussed, Mark hesitated, then slowly nodded. He opened the hatch and helped her to the surface. Above them, the sky was black and wide, filled with broken stars and dust clouds. The drone hovered just meters away now, scanning. The ruins. Lena crouched low, her wings flexing open. Mark held her shoulder and whispered, Don't fall. She turned and hugged him suddenly, her small arms tight. Then, without a word, she stepped back and ran 2 steps. Then the third was a leap. The thrusters fired. A burst of blue light scattered dust across the ledge, and she flew not smoothly, not high, but she was in the air. Mark's breath caught in his throat as she dipped, then rose again. The drone spotted her and followed. Beams flashing like lightning, but Lena twisted through the wind. Her movements sharp and wild. She didn't look back. She didn't scream. She soared. Mark stood there, frozen, heart pounding, eyes wet. He didn't know if she would survive, but for that moment, she was free. The sky exploded with light. Mark ducked as a shockwave rolled across the cliffs, knocking loose rocks down the slope. Far above, Lena was still in the air, dodging between flashes of blue fire from the drone. She wasn't flying like a machine, she was flying like she had been born for the sky, but the drone was faster, smarter, and now It was angry. Mark watched helplessly from the ground, his hand gripping the old radio receiver. The drone was transmitting something signals he couldn't decode, but he understood the message. More were coming. Lena twisted in the air again. Diving low and skimming the surface of the canyon, the drone followed, firing another pulse. She jerked hard to the right, but the energy blast clipped the edge of her wing. She tumbled through the air like a falling leaf, disappearing behind the ridge. Mark screamed her name, though he knew she couldn't hear him. He ran, boots slipping over gravel, heart thudding louder than the storm in the sky. He reached the edge and looked down. Smoke rose from a lower plateau. For a moment, nothing moved. Then he saw her. Lena was lying in the dust, one wing bent, sparks flickering from its core. But she was crawling toward a rock, trying to pull herself up. The drone circled once, then descended, its weapon arm charging for a final strike. Mark didn't think. He pulled out the signal jammer he had hidden months ago on old military device meant to scramble command drones. It only worked once for less than 20 seconds, but that was all he needed. He sprinted forward, sliding down the rocky path, slammed the device onto the ground, and flipped the switch. A high-pitched screech filled the air as the drone's lights blinked out for a moment. It twitched and spun mid-air. Confused, Lena looked up at him, eyes wide, and he shouted, "Now, go." She grabbed the side of the rock and pushed herself up. The wings sparked again, half working, half broken, but she jumped. Mark watched as she lifted. Barely clearing the edge of the canyon, wobbling like a wounded bird, the drone recovered and shot upward after her. But it was slower now, disoriented. Lena soared into the storm clouds, vanishing again from sight. Mark dropped to his knees. Breathing hard, he knew she was alive. He had seen it in her eyes. She wasn't done yet. But her flight had revealed something dangerous. Her wings worked. Yes, but only because of something inside her. The energy, the connection, the design, it was hers, not his. Back in the shelter, he checked her data drive again. There were files now he hadn't seen before, encrypted logs, lab notes, research files in strange alien code. He opened one and saw it. Project V-17. Not a weapon, not a soldier, a test, a prototype for life. They had tried to make something new, something that could adapt, fly, and evolve beyond limits. But Lena had done more than they planned. She had escaped, she had dreamed, and now she had flown. Mark sat quietly, staring at the dusty wall of the shelter. He realized something then. He hadn't built her wings to save her. She had given him a reason to believe again. Outside, the wind roared louder. A red light blinked far in the distance. In a distance, another ship entering the atmosphere. They were coming. Faster now. He didn't know when Lena would return, or if she could survive what came next. But he knew this: they had already lost her once. They wouldn't get her again without a fight. The wind outside screamed louder than before. It carried dust, static, and something worse, the sound of engines. Mark stood on the edge of the cliff, a pair of old goggles over his eyes, scanning the distant sky. He spotted them, 3 black ships descending in a triangle formation. Sleek, fast, official looking. They weren't scavengers. They were here for her. He backed away from the cliff and hurried into the shelter. His fingers shook as he packed the last tools into a bag. He didn't have a plan. He only had time. Maybe minutes, maybe less. But before he could seal the hatch, a sound hit his ears, a whisper of wind behind him. He turned quickly, and there she was. Lena stood just outside the shelter, wings wide, her face dusty, one eye bruised. But she was alive, stronger than before. Her landing had cracked one of the wing panels. But she didn't complain. She limped forward slightly, balancing herself on one wing like a crutch. Mark ran to her, arms wide, then stopped short. Lena looked different now, not just tired, focused, determined. Without a word, she pulled a bundle from under her arm and placed it in his hands. He opened it. Inside were 3 glowing cores and something else. A metal armband with strange engravings pulsing faint blue. He looked at her in confusion. She pointed to the device, then at him. Then at the sky. Mark finally understood. It wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about finishing what they started. She didn't want to keep running. She wanted to end it on her own terms, but she needed him, not to protect her, but to help her fight. He strapped on the armband, feeling a surge of energy pulse through his arm. For a moment, it made his skin burn. Then it settled like it was sinking with him. Lena had taken something from the drone's control chip. She had modified it, turned it into something else, a guide system, maybe even a weapon. Mark couldn't believe what she had done while flying. She wasn't just surviving, she was learning, adapting. The 3 black ships were getting closer now. Landing gear deployed, red lights scanning the terrain. Dust clouds formed behind them as they approached the valley edge. Lena looked up, eyes locked on the enemy. Mark crouched beside her, checking the backup energy cells and placing the cores into the stabilizers. The wings pulsed again, glowing brighter than ever before. The sky darkened as the ships hovered above the cliffs. Doors opening, figures stepped out tall. Armored, silent, their faces covered, their hands holding electric rifles. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Lena stepped forward, standing tall despite the damaged wing, her back straight, her eyes steady. Mark took his position beside her, pulling the armband over his jacket and tightening it. They were outnumbered, outgunned, outmatched, but something had changed. Lena no longer looked like a child. She looked like a force. The soldiers moved closer, scanning the area. One of them spoke through a mechanical voice box, "Return the prototype." Lena didn't move. The voice spoke again, louder. "V-17, obey." Mark noticed her fingers tightening into fists. Then suddenly, without warning, she screamed. Not with fear, but with power. The ground shook slightly. Her wings opened wide, releasing a pulse of bright blue energy that knocked the front soldier off his feet. Mark activated the armband. Teed lit up, syncing with the wing system, feeding off Lena's core. Together, they launched into motion. Lena flew upward like a bullet, dodging the first wave of fire, spinning into a dive and striking one of the ship engines with her foot. Mark ran through the dust, his device sending shock waves that disrupted the soldiers' visors. They fought as a unit, not because they had trained, but because they trusted each other. She wasn't just a project, and he wasn't just a man in hiding. They were a team now, and the sky was their battlefield. Smoke curled over the cliffs as the last enemy ship burst into flames. Sparks flew into the darkening sky, and the red scanners on the enemy soldiers finally flickered out. The battlefield was quiet now, but the air still felt heavy, like the ground itself was holding its breath. Mark stood near the edge, his arm bleeding, clothes torn. One eye nearly swollen shut, but he was alive. More than that, he had one. He turned slowly, eyes searching the broken sky above. Then he saw her. Lena was hovering gently in the air, wings stretched wide, glowing with pale blue light. Her face was calm, not angry, not afraid. She landed beside him softly, dust rising around her boots. Or rather, her winged feet. Mark let out a laugh, half joy, half pain. "You did it." Lena looked at him, stepped closer, and without a word, hugged him. Tight, as if she had always been his. He held her back just as firmly, whispering, "You're not just something they made. You're someone you chose to be, behind." The ships were burning wreckage, twisted metal, and shattered pride. No more voices from command. No more orders shouted through machines, only wind, smoke, and the slow sound of distant thunder rolling through the canyons. The shelter had taken damage in the fight, but most of the tools and tech were still there. Mark helped Lena inside. where she plugged her wing system into a charging port. She sat down, breathing slow and steady, eyes half closed, exhausted. He looked at her again, this alien child who had no legs when he found her. Now she sat with strength in her spine and stars in her eyes. Not a victim anymore, not even just a survivor. A symbol, a beginning. They stayed silent for a while. Then, without warning, Lena pulled a datapad forward and started typing something. Mark leaned over her shoulder, confused, on the screen. A message appeared translated from her mind, one word at a time. Others, like me, are still out there. Mark blinked. What do you mean? She turned the screen again, showing new maps, new coordinates. Blinking dots across distant systems, the files she had stolen from the drones were unlocking. Revealing names, locations, faces. They hadn't just made one prototype, they had made dozens, and many of them were still trapped, hidden, forgotten. Mark stood slowly, his voice quiet. You want to find them? Lena nodded, her face serious. Then she pointed at the wings. He followed her hand to the workbench, where a second frame sat unfinished but waiting. Mark smiled. You want me to fly too? She looked at him with that same glow in her eyes he saw the first day, not a question. Not a command, an invitation. They spent the next few weeks repairing, rebuilding, preparing. The sky that once hunted them now became their training ground. Lena flew higher each time, stronger, faster, guiding Mark as he learned to soar beside her. The wind no longer felt cold, it felt free. One morning as the twin suns rose, the two of them stood on the edge of the canyon again. Two figures. Two sets of wings, one alien, one human. Together, Mark looked over at her, heart steady. You ready? Lena smiled and tapped her chest once, then leaped forward. He followed. And the world below faded away as they rose into the clouds, side by side, no longer grounded, no longer broken, but flying toward something bigger, something waiting, because the girl who once had no legs had given him wings too.